Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, maybe put that classical physics textbook down for a minute, or maybe just forget everything you thought you knew about force.
Yeah, that might be necessary today.
Because we are looking at a framework that, well, it claims to fundamentally rewrite the rules of mechanics, not just tweak them, but unify them under one pretty radical mechanism. We're diving into part 27 of the Graviton Pressure Theory, GPT, from Sharif Ali Rashada. And our goal today is really to get our heads around this core claim that all those classical forces, weight, friction, inertia, tension, they aren't separate things.
Right. The idea is they're all just expressions of two key elements: the pressure from this external graviton field and the internal coherence, the structure of matter itself.
This huge conceptual shift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As the source material points out, physics has kind of been using what Rashada calls an uneasy patchwork of forces for centuries. Newton gave us amazing tools, sure, prediction tools, but the cause, the mechanism, it was always a bit murky.
Right, and then general relativity came along, which was this massive step, reframing gravity as geometry, space-time curvature. Beautiful math, but it still left that question of why things move or how they interact, feeling, well, incomplete somehow.
Exactly. And GPT seems to be an attempt to bring causality back into mechanics. It's not focused on geometry, but on active directional field dynamics.
Yeah.
It's essentially saying, look, we need to ditch these centuries-old metaphors of pulling and shoving. Think pressure, think flow.
Okay, let's unpack that original patchwork then, because, any intro physics class throws out like a dozen different force labels. Normal force, tension, compression, friction, shear, weight, all these things. Why did classical mechanics need so many separate categories?
Well, they needed them because the framework they had, the Newtonian one, just didn't have a way to unify the underlying causes. So what did we do? We labeled the effects we saw. The source argues these forces were basically defined empirically, not mechanistically.
So they were just tags, placeholders for things we observed but didn't fully grasp the how of?
Precisely. And Rashada's framework really hones in on those conceptual weak spots. Take normal force, for instance. It's just a label, right?
Yeah.
It says a surface pushes back, but gives zero insight into how it does that pushing.
Okay.
And friction, it's treated mostly as an empirical thing. We can calculate it, sure, but the fundamental origin, still debated.
And what about the really big ones, the almost philosophical concepts like inertia and action-reaction? How does GPT handle those?
Well, inertia traditionally is just. It's labeled a property of mass, which is a bit circular, right? It's defined by the very thing it's supposed to explain.
Yeah, that's true.
And the source material calls out action-reaction as basically a mechanical tautology. It describes how momentum is conserved, but it doesn't give any underlying physical mechanism for why that pushback actually happens.
But hang on, aren't things like momentum conservation fundamental? Is GPT suggesting even that is fundamentally a field effect?
Absolutely. That's the radical simplification GPT proposes. All these classical forces get redefined. They become interactions between just two unified components, this external graviton field pressure and the internal coherence structure of matter. Gravity itself is redefined as an anisotropic pressure gradient.
Anisotropic meaning not uniform, coming from one direction more than others.
Exactly. Like pressure hitting us mainly from, say, above. And matter, in this view, isn't passive. It's a coherent lattice structure that actively resists this pressure.
Okay, that's the theory. Let's get to the aha moments. How does this redefine everyday stuff? Like me standing here right now, classically, gravity pulls me down, the ground pushes up normal force. How does GPT see this?
Okay, picture this. You're standing in a constant directional flow, like a super dense, invisible shower pouring down gravitons. That's the anisotropic pressure.
Right.
Now, your body, your shoes, the floor, they're all highly coherent structures. Think of them like invisible lattices, like rebar inside concrete, but made of, field coherence. You're actively resisting that downward field pressure.
So the ground isn't pushing up in the old sense.
Not exactly. What a scale measures in the GPT view is the net coherent resistance your body structure offers to that field flow passing through you. It's not measuring a pull from the earth. It's measuring your resistance to the push from the field. It's field tension, essentially.
Whoa. Okay. So weight is field pressure resistance. What about friction then, if I slide my foot?
Friction gets redefined too. The term used is decoherence dissonance.
Decoherence dissonance, okay.
Think about trying to shuffle two decks of cards, perfectly cut cards, but they're slightly misaligned. They catch, right? They don't slide smoothly. There's interference.
That's a really good analogy. Makes sense.
So your shoe sole and the ground, they each have their own internal patterns, these graviton corridor alignments. When you try to move one across the other, if those alignments don't match up perfectly at the boundary, you get this non-harmonic field interference. It's like static.
And that interference pushes back.
It manifests as an opposing field pressure. That's what we feel and call friction.
Okay, here's a detail from the source that really made me pause the explanation for heat generated by friction. How does that fit in?
Right, the heat. In GPT, thermal agitation, or heat, is basically the result of failed graviton alignment. When the system can't harmonize those clashing field patterns at the boundary, when the corridors keep jamming,
Yeah.
the graviton resonance energy doesn't just disappear. It gets converted into stochastic decoherence, random jiggling, basically. Vibrational noise at the field level.
So the heat we feel is literally the field's coherent structure shaking itself apart because of that interference.
That's the idea. The energy becomes random vibration instead of smooth flow.
Mind-blowing. Okay, let's circle back to inertia. If mass isn't inherently resistant to change, what is inertia in this model?
GPT argues inertia isn't a property of the mass itself. It's a property of the graviton field saturation and its directional memory.
Directional memory, like the field remembers which way something is going.
Sort of. When an object moves steadily, its internal coherent structure establishes a kind of preferred path, a dominant directional resonance within the field. Imagine it like carving a smooth, invisible channel or corridor in the field along its direction of motion.
Ah, okay. So to change direction or speed to accelerate, I have to fight against that established channel.
Exactly. You have to expend energy to reconfigure that corridor resonance to carve a new path. The effort needed to reorganize that field alignment is what we experience and measure as inertia.
So mass isn't the source of inertia, it's more like a measure of how strongly that field channel is established.
Essentially, yes. What we call mass relates to the degree of field saturation and the phase stability needed to maintain that channel. More stability, a deeper channel, means greater inertia. Acceleration, then, is literally the act of restructuring those internal corridor alignments to match a new incoming directional pressure.
That feels much more dynamic. It replaces an abstract property with an active field mechanism into tension, like in a stretched rope.
It's another form of pressure management. Tension becomes a bidirectional stabilizing pressure within the material, resisting the deformation or stretching of those internal graviton corridors. It's all about maintaining the structure against field forces.
So no need for separate Newtonian forces. It all comes down to pressure and coherence.
That's the claim. It's all interconnected field dynamics.
Okay, let's shift from motion to structure itself. If I push too hard on something, it bends, maybe it breaks. How does GPT explain structural mechanics? Why do materials deform or fail?
Deformation, in GPT, is seen as a visible sign of graviton field phase failure. Think back to that internal lattice structure, that invisible rebar.
Okay.
Elasticity, when something bends and snaps back, is described as phase memory. The lattice distorts under pressure, sure, but it retains enough memory of its original phase alignment to recover its shape when the pressure is removed. It snaps back to its low-energy configuration.
So Hooke's law, the spring constant stuff, still works.
It still works observationally, but GPT provides a why. The elastic modulus, how stiff something is, becomes the ratio of the field disturbance you apply versus the structure's inherent ability to rephase, to remember its configuration.
And when you push past that phase memory limit, you get permanent bending, plasticity.
Exactly. Plasticity is the reorganization of those internal graviton corridors into a new, stable, minimum energy pathway. When you permanently bend a piece of metal, you've essentially forced its internal field structure to find a new equilibrium alignment.
Does this explain things like work hardening, where bending metal makes it harder?
It does. The idea is that the deformation process itself can actually create new, aligned corridors, potentially increasing the overall coherence locally, making it harder to deform further in that way.
And yield strength, the point where it starts to permanently deform.
That corresponds directly to the maximum differential graviton field pressure the structure's current alignment can handle before that forced reorganization, that corridor realignment, becomes the energetically easier option.
Wow. And the implication there is huge.
It is. GPT suggests you could potentially tune a material's yield behavior, dynamically harden or soften it by manipulating its internal coherence fields directly.
That's incredible. And fracture. When something just snaps, the theory's definition is pretty stark.
Yeah, it's not just seen as mechanical separation. It's described as a collapse of coherent field transmission. a phase singularity event. The field lines basically disconnect. The structure fails because the underlying field supporting its coherence couldn't maintain phase continuity anymore.
This really does shift the field from just being the background to being the active player, maybe even a programmable substrate. Which leads us to the really exciting, maybe speculative part of Rashada's work, field engineering, graviton lensing, and phase modulation.
Right. Graviton lensing is a key area where GPT makes different predictions than general relativity. GR, as we said, talks about space-time curvature bending light. GPT frames lensing as directional graviton flow, causing refraction based on pressure gradients.
Okay, and the difference there is, I remember a key point of GR is that all light bends the same, regardless of frequency, because it's just following the curve of space-time itself.
Precisely. But if deflection is due to pressure-based interaction with the field, as GPT suggests, then the theory allows for the possibility of pressure-based chromatic deflection. Different frequencies or types of field interaction might refract differently.
That's huge. That's a potentially testable difference between the theories.
It absolutely is. If observed, it would be major evidence.
And this idea of manipulating the field leads to applications like inertial stabilization. If inertia is this field drag, this channel memory, can we reduce it?
The theory suggests yes. It talks about inertial coherence anchoring. The crucial insight is about latency, the time it takes for the field coherence to be restored or reestablished when motion changes. That's the inertial response time.
So if you could somehow speed that up.
If you could use active field manipulation to instantly reestablish coherence during acceleration, basically erasing the old channel and forming the new one immediately, you could potentially tune inertia. A massive object might behave inertially, like a much smaller one, if its field memory can be instantly overwritten or compensated for.
Which brings us to graviton phase modulation, or GPM. You called the structure the hardware. Is GPM like the field software?
That's a good way to put it. In GPT, phase isn't just a property, it's the logic of gravitational communication. Controlling the phase alignment between different parts of the field or structure is how you control the continuity and flow of that field pressure. If you can deliberately shift phase, you can actively sculpt the field.
The source mentioned some pretty wild potential techniques, like oscillatory crystal networks. What's the idea there?
Imagine specific crystal lattices that resonate strongly with the graviton field. By applying, say, pulsed voltages, you could make the crystal lattice vibrate in very controlled ways. These vibrations would induce localized phase shifts in the graviton field passing through or around it. They could act like resonant routers.
Routers for gravity.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
To redirect, gate, maybe even nullify gravitational flow in specific areas or directions.
And then there's the gravitational diode. That sounds like pure sci-fi.
It does, but the proposed mechanism involves magnetic phase biasing, using carefully patterned thin films of specific materials to introduce a controlled phase delay in the graviton field interaction. The idea is to create a structure that permits easy graviton corridor propagation in one direction, but creates interference and impedance resistance in the opposite direction.
Like a one-way street for a field pressure.
Exactly. A diode, but for the graviton field.
The list of potential applications that opens up is just staggering. If any of this holds true, you've got directional propulsion actively pushing against the field itself.
Or inertial dampening. Imagine reducing those pressure differentials across a rapidly accelerating vehicle. No more G-forces, potentially. Smooth, instant changes in motion.
And the really far-out stuff mentioned. Phase-based cloaking. Making something invisible by shifting its coherence out of phase with the background field.
So detection systems based on field interaction wouldn't register it. And even gravitational holography projecting stable 3D pressure patterns into empty space, creating structures out of pure field potential.
Okay, let's try to bring this home. The key takeaway for you listening. This deep dive into GPT presents a fundamental shift. Classical mechanics saw force as all these separate causes, pushes, pulls, friction, weight. GPT tries to unify it all as pressure dynamics and the coherence response of matter.
The mechanics of how things hold their shape, how they move. It becomes like the music of pressure, as the source puts it. And the focus shifts completely. Matter isn't just passively pushed around anymore. The graviton field itself becomes this active, causal, and crucially, maybe a programmable substrate. We move from just understanding what happens to maybe understanding how to control the underlying dynamics.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to chew on based on where this theory points. If GPT is right, if inertia and mechanical limits are ultimately about phase memory and field response time, not just fixed structural properties, What happens if you could tune that phase response time, maybe even close to zero? Does the whole concept of a cosmic speed limit for matter or even a maximum impact force still hold meaning? Could some limits we assume are fundamental actually be tunable? Something to think about.